I asked the question about globality after Flux's talk because, in fact, I really do see the global as potentially disrupting the story of nation that I think really does guide much of American studies, including New American Studies. And I think that, if we can reimagine the global, not as globalization, but as a site of exchange and contestation, a sort of site where differences can really come together, it could potentially provide a way to get out of that bind where resistance or the global is outside of the nation, right? Which I think is characteristic of some strains of New Americanism and certainly of the kind of political transnationalism and aesthetic transnationalism that you spoke about earlier. And so if it's a new kind of structure, it's also and it doesn't remain outside. Then it's also possible to bring the global inside, to sort of take that structure and see how differences might settle on particular places. And this is what I was also trying to bring out when I asked that question about place. That many have seen place as really productive as a kind of as generating differences, multifarious differences, and also being sites where new kinds of utopias are imagined that are really, though they might seem local or parochial, they actually are very functioning in very different kinds of registers to nation or nationality. So, just that the global is a structure for difference rather than akin to globalization. And also that global could provide a new model for aesthetics. If we've been so kind of trapped in national aesthetics as the kind of mode of working in American studies, maybe a global aesthetics, in terms of that kind of exchange, contestation, would get us to a different place in terms of thinking about our field. And again, I think there are many different renderings of the global, but this is something like what Saskia Saskin wants to do with the global, when she's, when it's not always indexed to globalization, to that story, which I think really that story of globalization really does, or can rely on nation in the ways I think you were articulating. When I was thinking of that question in relation to Wegman's talk, I was wondering if race, too, might be another kind of category that could do some of that same work of being a space for contestation, exchange, disruption, that doesn't necessarily have to be structured by kind of national and nationalist understandings of difference. And when you're talking about, particular historical events where you were understanding race in your class, like conquest, encounter, and slavery, it made me think that, well, that's an alternative category, really, to nation that could do a lot of work for American studies in ways that operate outside of the national. And relatedly, I thought that in many ways, some of the critiques of America that were being made were at times using, or particularly I think in your talk, Winifred, were using America almost as a stand-in for multiculturalism. That it was a critique of multiculturalism that was being advanced in those moments, that you saw as kind of nationalist. Rather than the sort of object of America kind of being more expansive. And I just thought we could talk a little bit about that, whether there are alternative models for difference, different from multiculturalism, that could actually reanimate America. And this is to really speak to your point about, okay, so if we're going to do American studies, maybe we should talk about, okay, what is America? What are our investments in America? And maybe that really does have to do with radically new models for difference, for thinking difference. I wanted to pick up quickly just something in your paper, Robin, about American studies as a kind of area studies. I thought we could have a really interesting discussion about that. I don't actually really have a problem with that, of thinking about American studies as an area of studies. I think there are really interesting consequences of that. One of which might be that we could, in American studies, we could learn something, or we could do something that has been done really well in area studies, which is developing all sorts of cultural and linguistic fluencies that I think have been hard to develop within American studies. I mean, learning a language, for instance, I think could be really interesting and important, and might be some kind of the product of some sort of exchange between American studies and other area studies disciplines, and also in this kind of could be developed in this move to conceive of ourselves as, you know, sort of constituting an area. And of course, the area doesn't have to be, you know, singularly understood culturally, linguistically, racially. It could be multiply understood. And I think, you know, I'm sure we can have a very vigorous debate about that, but some of the best of area studies, I think, really does that well. And I think I was thinking of the other comments in terms of, okay, so I don't have any problem thinking of American studies as area studies. I am someone too who has been trained as in American studies, but has never thought of myself as an Americanist, or really as American in any singular way. So that may be, you know, part of why, well, okay, American studies could be an area, or could be that sort of kind of a discrete category. And lastly, and perhaps a little more provocatively, I wanted to ask if, and we talked about this a little bit over coffee, if we might in fact be open to the extinction of American studies, right? As so many of us are involved in projects that are really kind of pushing the boundaries, you know, outside of the nation, kind of acknowledging the limits of the nation. So many of us are sick of the nation, right? Maybe it is, you know, there are moments, and obviously it doesn't have to mean, you know, we shut down all the programs, the American Studies programs. I hope there are no deans here, right? And, you know, whatever. I'm sure all American Studies programs are at risk. But you know, in terms of a kind of political gestures, you know, to just really to think about kind of what that would mean. You know, is American Studies superseded, perhaps, by some other set of interdisciplinary formations that are constructed, you know, either in disciplinary terms or in global terms, right? Is that one of the effects, you know, rhetorical effects of moving from the new Americanist series at Duke to the transnational studies series at Duke? And again, I don't think this has to be, you know, written in stone, but I think it really actually would be productive for us to question the limits of the field and the transformation of the field into something, you know, altogether different, you know, with a different title even. So I'll end there and maybe give the two of you a chance to respond to some questions and then open it up to the audience.